In Burbank, California, Tim Burton spent a somewhat reclusive childhood drawing cartoons, reading books, and watching old horror movies, until his 1979 short, Stalk of the Celery Monster, led to an apprenticeship at Disney. There, his live-action short Frankenweenie caught the attention of comedian Paul Reubens, who selected Burton to direct Pee-wee's Big Adventure in 1985. The surprise success of his debut feature and his unconventionally dark and quirky follow-up Beetlejuice resulted in Burton being given a huge studio production. His lavish Gothic take on Batman in 1989 was a worldwide phenomenon, earning the film 6 BAFTA nominations and securing Burton's place on Hollywood's A-list. Burton received his first BAFTA directing nomination in 2003 for the fantasy adventure Big Fish, and his second soon after for Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And in 2012, audiences have enjoyed 2 features from the director: the comedy tribute to the 1960s soap opera Dark Shadows, and a stop-motion animated remake of Frankenweenie. It is with great pleasure that we welcome Tim Burton to BAFTAs and Life in Pictures. You obviously started to watch films really early on, in movie theatres or on television?
Both. Back when I was growing up, there was, they still had drive-ins. There was like 3 drive-ins in Burbank, which was great. And there was a theater called the Cornell Theater, which was amazing because it was kind of a run-down theater, but they would show like triple features. You could see like 3 movies for 50 cents. So, and they were always a strange, like mixture of things. There'd be like a Vincent Price, Roger Corman movie, a Scream, Blackula Scream, and Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde, and like Godzilla movies, Japanese science fiction movies. It was a strange, like they just mix up the weirdest kind of groupings of films. But that's probably the main theater I went to because it was cheap and it was 3 movies.
So the kind of era that you were looking at presumably, but on television you might have got earlier stuff, I suppose.
Oh yeah, like all the Universal horror. I mean, it was back before music videos came in, so on television they'd show things on regular television that they probably wouldn't even show now. I mean, because some of those there would be like Mexican horror films dubbed into English, and Italian, like Mario Bava films, and the old Universal films. And I mean, it was a time really when you could see all of these films. As soon as like music videos came into play, they'd stop showing them.
Was there any limit on the amount of films or television you were allowed to watch? Because this idea of the boy inside who wants to do the things inside and is always being told to go outside, did that happen to you?
Yeah, but I think my parents didn't seem to mind some. I don't know. I think it's because they let the television deal with me as opposed to them dealing. It was a way for cheap babysitting, really.
And when did you start to make your first home movies?
Well, early on. I mean, like most kids, you're just kind of, it's like a science project. You're playing around, making little Super 8 films just for fun. And it wasn't until like I got later in school, I wasn't a very good student, so I would make these films. And like I remember I was supposed to read a book on Houdini that was about that. And I was not a reader. Unfortunately, that was the one part of the growing up in this sort of television generation. I didn't read as much as I probably should have or would have liked to. Got most of it through film. So I did a little short film, me as Houdini escaping from a train track or a swimming pool, and had fun doing it and got an A, a great grade. So I found it was a great way of getting a good grade and having fun at the same time. So that kind of got me into it. Although I never really thought I would ever become doing that. I think I was interested in animation. I think that's where I put my focus early on.
But in terms of the sort of one of the presiding influences, you mentioned Vincent Price just now. Do you remember the first time that you saw Vincent Price on screen?
Oh yeah, I mean, it was all those movies, those Roger Corman films, and things like The Tingler, and I think it was the Roger Corman films because it was those were the ones where he kind of felt like a character who was, the sort of melodramatic nature of him, and the sort of somebody going insane and the kind of seeing things and hearing things. It's just something that I guess unfortunately I could relate to. I mean, it was stuff that kind of character was something that just sort of psychologically spoke to me. I mean, that's why, you know, I sent him this thing, Vincent, and he responded in a letter, and it's basically helped get the movie made, you know, because of his, you know,
this was the stop motion animation.
Yeah, it was 5 minute, the first thing I ever did at Disney, and you know, he helped get it made just by thinking, yeah, you know, he loved to narrate it, and I also felt really, not knowing the person, I felt like he understood. He felt I could feel he didn't feel like I was just like a fan. He got the sort of, I felt the meaning of it, which made me feel really good too. So it was the first really great experience I had in Hollywood, really.
And there at Disney, you also made the live-action Frankenweenie, and obviously we'll be coming towards Frankenweenie at the end. And now that was about 30 minutes or so long, wasn't it? And what was the reaction? Because, I mean, basically, without giving away too much of the story, it's the Frankenstein story with the dog, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it was meant to go out as a feature. In the old days at Disney, you know, they'd release one of their animated films, Snow White, whatever, Lady in the Tramp. And so they used to put out these sort of nature shorts just to kind of, because the films were not that long. So it was kind of an attempt to go back to those days where they'd have like a, you know, a kooky animal, you know, like the raccoon that comes to town, or the, you know, those kind of things that they would do. And so, you know, I got the opportunity to do it, and then they had a screening with it with Pinocchio, and you know, people were fine. You know, no kids were screaming or anything like that, but the word was that it was too scary. Then they showed Pinocchio, and kids were like running out of the theater screaming. And it's like, and that's the thing that always sort of got to me. And it still gets me this day. It's like, people go, oh, it's too scary, it's too weird for children. And you know, you have to remind people that Disney movies have always, you know, they've always had that. I mean, that's for most people, those are the most memorable parts. And I just find it sort of fascinating how adults forget those feelings that they had, you know, because they saw those movies, and their parents probably saw those movies, you know, so it's interesting.
My wife and I would like to ask you a couple of questions.
Sure. Go ahead, shoot.
Well, for instance, what are your qualifications?
Well, I attended Juilliard. I'm a graduate of the Harvard Business School. I travel quite extensively. I lived through the Black Plague, and I had a pretty good time during that. I've seen The Exorcist about 167 times, and it keeps getting funnier every single time I see it. Not to mention the fact that you're talking to a dead guy. Now, what do you think? You think I'm qualified?
Michael Keaton, at that point, you knew him because you'd worked with him, or?
No, I had actually wanted Sammy Davis Jr. to play, but the studio said no. But I'm glad, I mean, because he was great. I really didn't know his work very, very well. I'd seen a few things and stuff, but just when I met him, and it was just such a great energy, you know, and just talking to him, and like I said, just he's got such a great sense of improv that it just, you know, as soon as I met him, you know, that was it.
So this is the first of several collaborations with Michael Keaton, but also it's the first time that you worked with Danny Elfman.
Mm-hmm. No, I worked with him on Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
Right.
Yeah, that was his first kind of big movie score, and that was my first. And so I used to go see him in band when he was, you know, performing with his band Oingo Boingo in clubs in L.A. And just something about his music that, even though it was kind of whatever kind of music you'd call it, it had a sort of a cinematic quality, which I thought. So
they saw that you could make something really impressive out of a relatively low budget. So they said, we're going to give you a big budget, and we're going to give you Batman. Now, was Batman something that had been sort of a personal enthusiasm of yours?
Yeah, I mean, I think as, you know, I would have probably, you know, my favorite comic book character. I always liked the kind of the duality and the hidden nature. You know, that's why I love monster movies and Phantom of the Opera. And Batman and the characters in that were the closest things to those kind of movies. And you know, it's the character kind of hiding himself and the split personality aspect of it all. You know, and just that world, that was probably my definitely favorite comic.
Although I suppose at that stage, even then, people would remember the 60s TV series. That was very much in the culture in that rather kind of camp way. And then there were the people who liked the graphic novels. So were you sort of treading around preconceptions about it?
Well, yeah, I mean, I grew up as a kid watching the TV show, but the thing that excited me was the opportunity to try to do something which I did, more of a darker comic, which most comics were always perceived as light, kind of things, and so I felt that was an interesting new challenge that, it was, and I mean the studio was for it. I think they were for that approach. They were still nervous because I think they always felt with me it's like, too dark, it's too dark, it's too dark, and now it looks like an ice capade, compared to the way things have gone, So I mean, but at the time, it was perceived as a little,
But you set Batman off on that trajectory.
Well, but also people got worried too because they thought with Michael Keaton, is like, oh, he's going to make it. It's like going to be like a joke. It's going to be like like the comic. It's going to be like the TV show because he's a comedian and stuff. And I picked him because I just felt. I was looking at a lot of real tough-looking guy, kind of traditional action star kind of people, and it just felt like, well, you look at him, and he kind of needs to dress up like a bat because doesn't look like, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, a big tough guy, and he's got the kind of crazy eyes, and I knew even though there was a lot of criticism before it came out that we're going to make a joke of it. I mean, sort of knew. That wasn't the goal.
I know who you are. Let me tell you about this guy I know, Jack. Mean kid, bad seed, hurt people. I like him already. Yeah, the problem was he got sloppy, crazy. He started to lose it. He had a head full of bad wiring, I guess. Couldn't keep it straight up here. He was the kind of guy who couldn't hear the train till it was 2 feet from him. You know what happened to this guy, Jack? Well, made mistakes. And then he had his lights out! Now you want to get nuts! Come on! Let's get nuts.
Tell me something, my friend. You ever dance with the devil in the pale moonlight?
What?
I always ask that of all my prey.
Having charge of a vast production like that, I mean, sometimes some directors find that destabilizing in some way, or they find that it's difficult to hold on to their vision.
No, it was good because I did the movie here, which was nice. It got away from the whole Hollywood sort of, all the chatter about casting, blah, blah, blah. So it was really great. I mean, I was able to kind of come here and just focus on the movie, and that was a great experience for me. It was, and at the time, Pinewood, there was really that much going on, so we kind of had the whole studio built on the back lot there. So it was that helped a lot, being here.
So Edward Scissorhands, obviously, then that creates a very, in terms of your work, you were known for Batman, but this is something that is seen as a very sort of particular aesthetic vision as well.
Yeah, it's like, you try to put everything personal into every movie, but yeah, I think it was the first one that was sort of, from me, based on stuff, my own kind of story. So, yeah, but it was strange too, because after doing Batman, it was meant to be low budget, but it was really strange. I had to go all the way to the depths of interior Florida because they think, well, once you make a big movie, that everything is big and everything is, so. We had to walk away from so many locations, like swamplands in Florida, because they thought, well, this is a giant movie, and so it's a lot of money, and so it was actually quite a struggle to get made, because it had to just try to be as quiet about it as possible. an idea story that, you know, been kind of percolating for a few years. Certainly not necessarily as a film, but just as a feeling and all. So that was something that it was very personal. And again, after the big sort of budget of Batman, to kind of go back and do something smaller was, you know.
So Johnny Depp, at this stage, Johnny Depp was known much more for far more mainstream kind of things, wasn't he? So where did you come across him?
I mean, I didn't really know who he was, but then I met him and I thought, well, he's that character because he's looked upon as like a teen idol, and he's like all out there, you know, on Tiger Beat magazine, and I could tell meeting him that that's not who he was in his heart. So here's a guy who's perceived as something in real life, but is something else inside. So it just felt like he got that character completely, because that's what the character was. And also, it's kind of like a silent movie character. So, you know, he just had a very expressive. It's like I love people when you just look at them and get a feeling from them, you know, without having to speak. And so, you know, he had all of those elements, and you know, so it was really just based on meeting him that he seemed right.
And in terms of this, obviously being the beginning of your long working relationship, right from the beginning, was it a sort of collaborative thing? Did he have ideas too?
Oh, yeah, I mean, you know, both fairly nonverbal people, so, you know, oftentimes the crew will come up and say, what are you talking about? Then we can quite understand the conversations, which is helpful in my case. and so, but there was definitely a connection from the beginning that way. And like I said, I always felt he was much more of like a character actor. You know, we often discuss like great old, you know, like, you know, Lon Chaney or Boris Karloff, or people, you know, that were the kind of people that he was always interested in. Those are the kind of people I love too. So, you know, for me, it's like a freedom, somebody that, you know, doesn't have a certain kind of vanity to just want to be a certain way, that kind of explore different characters and all. So for me, and he doesn't like watching himself, which saves time at the monitor and all of that sort of thing. So it's good, you know.
So from the sort of the huge scale of like a Batman film, then we have Ed Wood, which is all about a guy who pretty much, he didn't exactly do it in his backyard, but he did everything. Well, of course you do everything on your films.
Yeah,
much.
but I mean, I was more interested because I grew up, and it's sort of, I think my career reflects it. There's a fine line between success and failure. You know, I mean, it's like every film could be like, I could have been fine, and that's what I was fascinated by him, because he was known to be like the worst filmmaker, and yet his films were memorable. I mean, I remember him. I remember seeing Plan 9 from Outer Space and thinking, wow, you know, who made that? You know, that's, so even though something's deemed as horrible, it's still special, and I just felt that to me is something that I could easily relate to. It made me really think about, like, you know, success and not success, and how things are, you know, sort of go either way.
And you had to make it in black and white because that was what he did.
Well, because I wanted to. And again, did not meet with much enthusiasm.
And there's something in Ed Wood which I think the black and white somehow brings out his optimism, the kind of shine of him, even more than you could ever do in colour.
I agree. I think you take away colour, and then, you know, it's like when they say you take away one sense, your other senses get heightened. And I think that that's true. I think you kind of, you know, you see things a little bit different, and it kind of takes you back to that time a little bit more. For me, like I said, it makes it's more of emotional. It feels right. It's just, and it's hard to describe that to a studio, to say, oh, it feels right to do this, but.
We're about to embark on quite a journey. 4 days of hard work. But when it's over, we'll have a picture that'll entertain, enlighten, and maybe even move millions of people.
Excuse me, Eddie, I don't mean to interrupt. I'm worried about the light.
Good thinking. All right, we'll talk about days 3 and 4 later. Let's get that first shot off. Scene 17, Glendo looking in the window. And action! about that? Let's move on.
Don't you want a second take for protection?
What's to protect? It was perfect. Come on.
Hey! Cops!
We don't have a permit. Run!
The Mars Attacks, which comes not long after that, in '96. Now that was okay, the sci-fi film, if you like, on the big scale. But was that pastiche then?
Well, no, I tried to remain very true to the source material, bubblegum cards. Great, no, not a great novel, no, but I mean, that was more, I don't know, I was feeling kind of strange, I think, at the time. And it was, I don't know, I was feeling very strange about America. I don't know, I was going through some strange moments, I guess. But, you know, and there was something about those old kind of movies. And again, it kind of went back to just kind of this kind of anarchic kind of thing of Beetlejuice for me, a little bit of kind of mixing it up and mixing up the genres and mixing up feelings and emotions and things. So yeah, I guess that it would be considered a bit more like that.
How do you know when you've got an idea that feels to you that absolutely will be a runner as a film?
I don't really know. I mean, honestly, I feel like from the beginning, every movie I've ever worked on could go either way. I'm surprised if it's a failure. I'm surprised if it's a success. I feel like, you know, I think that when I get into trouble sometimes, and it's happened on a fair amount of movies, is where sometimes the studio will want to do a movie and I'm excited about it, and there's, you know, you have a momentum going, and sometimes you get involved and get before the script's quite ready or quite there, and it kind of becomes like a moving train. And so that's happened a few times, and I try to not fall into that again, because, you know, oftentimes, you know, people can be working on a project for 10 years, then all of a sudden the timing, okay, now is the time. And so it's a lot of it has to do with timing and making sure that the elements are there. But every film I've done, I've wanted to do, and kind of, there's been something in it that's intrigued me, or, you know, that's made me want to do it.
Do you get that feeling with films that you think, oh, I haven't done this kind of, I mean, are there ever elements, or do you think, do you like to do what you know?
People keep, you know, I guess people think I kind of do the same, but it's like my drawing, it's like, it's hard for me to change, like if somebody said change your drawing style, it would be hard for me. I don't really think about a style or anything. So I just always kind of do things that intrigue me, and, you know, like I grew up on horror movies or monster movies, but I've never really made a scary movie, you know. But I actually wasn't scared by any of those movies, so it probably makes sense why. But when I was like 3 years old, I would watch these movies and never be scared at all. I mean,
Do you never had nightmares or didn't do any of that?
No, but normal, you know, like real life stuff, you know, like going to school or having dinner with my parents, or going to a relative's house, you know. Real nightmares.
See this one shine, how he smiles in the light, my friend, my faithful friend. Speak to me, friend, whisper, I'll listen. I know you've been locked out of sight all these years, like me, my friend.
But of course, in doing Sweeney Todd, you're taking not just a musical, you're taking what many people consider to be an opera. You know, been on in the Royal Opera House here.
Yeah, that didn't go. They should have seen that meeting. Do a musical with lots of blood with nobody that's ever sang before, doing Stephen Sondheim. Yeah.
But presumably, before you start any of that, Stephen Sondheim is on board, so that's...
Yeah, no, I mean, he was great. Honestly, because, you know, he just let us do it, and you know, it was a big thing for us. I think for him, it's a really important musical for him, and he was really cool about, you know, letting people that hadn't sang before do probably one of the hardest musicals to do. And so, you know, he just gave us support. I mean, I did admit I while he was watching the movie for the first time, I definitely went down to the pub with my music editor before, because I couldn't, but when he saw, he was really great about it, which obviously meant a whole lot, because, I don't think I'd ever been so scared showing somebody a movie as showing him.
So you elected to make it here, and you built these amazing sets, and so, where you could have used computer effects, you wanted there to be sort of.
Oh yeah, well again, it's more of a tactile thing, and I especially for that, especially with people that haven't sang before, or just sort of felt it was important that they were in that environment. I mean, it's something that's, most actors would probably say. I mean, yeah, I've done green screen stuff, and it's really hard. It's really it's not the greatest way to work. It's nice when the actors can be in an environment and feel it. That's why costume and sets and all are such, I think, extra. Most of the actors I work with, extremely important, those things. I mean, a lot of actors, they don't find their character until they start to get into the clothes and find the right shoes and things, and so that's when you see it come to life.
And fantastically gory. Now, this is not something you invented, because actually a lot of the stage productions of it were
some
really
of them are even
bloody.
worse. I mean, but see, again, that was always my argument. I mean, again, when I was a kid, I would see movies like a lot of the Hammer that was on TV on a Saturday afternoon, and I mean, I remember this movie called The Brain That Wouldn't Die, where the guy's arm gets ripped off and he's like going down the wall, and it's dripping on the wall, and I mean, this was like, and I'm a child watching this on regular television on Saturday afternoon. So for me, I didn't feel like with the Hammer stuff. You always felt just very theatrical, and so I felt actually the more, and you go back to those old Grand Guignol and what you read about those, where they, were actually throwing buckets of it on stage and all. So it just felt like it was a part of what the material was, and going back to even before the movies into the Grand Guignol Theater.
I mean, there are films we haven't even touched on or discussed, and Charlie and
Probably
Chocolate
for the
Factory,
best,
and Alice in Wonderland. I suppose when you go to something like Charlie or Alice, which have been visited before, I mean, Charlie particularly, what's the excitement in going back for that?
Well, in terms of Charlie, I mean, I know a lot of people love the other movie and stuff. I wasn't quite so much of a fan of it, but I love Roald Dahl's, I love his, so, for me it was kind of trying to go more back to the source material a bit more, and try to, kind of go a little bit more towards the book, which that was one of the first books I remember reading, and so I tried not to think too much about the film, and just go back more to the original, like Roald Dahl's having a father back in there, and just exploring some of the other stuff that he had in the book.
And talking of going back, Frankenweenie is now in cinemas. Now, so we're going back there 30 years, pretty much. Why did you want to do that?
Well, just stop motion, and also when they did that MoMA show in New York, they uncovered all this sort of drawings that I didn't remember having, and sort of looked back at the drawings, and doing stop motion, and the idea of doing the stop motion in black and white. It just felt like and then over the years, just other characters, and so going from the Frankenstein kind of structure to when Universal started, Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, or House of Frankenstein, where they put all the monsters in, or Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. The idea of kind of expanding on that structure, and also just remembering certain kids and teachers in school. It was a real memory piece. So I got to kind of go and explore, I remember that kid, I remember that girl, a strange girl, or I remember that teacher, and so it made it in other monster movies and things. So it just made it feel like a whole different project, a bit more of a pure version of it.
And with extra layers put in, which those intervening decades had allowed you to...
Yeah, it was fun to kind of go back and go, I remember that teacher, or I remember, and actually be more specific to the geography of Burbank and the way the classroom looked, or the town and the school. And so it was a real fun to kind of explore those, go deeper into those memories.
And maybe with a little bit of sort of contemporary resonance about superstition surrounding, or people being very worried about science these days. And
yeah, well, and also just like, I don't know, there's a trend of like where people go on creative thinking. There's always a weird kind of, whether it's like art or science. Yeah, there's a sort of interest but resistance to things, and I found that especially as you go on more and more, art, science, creative thinking, thinking outside the box a little bit. There's always a resistance to that.
It's an omen. Last month he dreamed about Bob. He fell in a manhole. He dreamed about Toshaki. The day he pitched a perfect game. And Nassar the day he got knocked unconscious. If Mr. Whiskers dreams about you, it means something big is gonna happen.
But with Frankenweenie, it's still stop motion, but also with extra computer sophistication on top.
Not too much. That was a thing on this, is that because you can do so much now, I didn't want to blur the lines. There's, some of the lightning is graphic, but no, like the tears and everything that we wanted to make it kind of stop motion. I mean, there's a few effects, but no, the thing that they said to the crew and all the lighting effects, that was the fun of it. I mean, when there'd be like water reflections, we had a cracked mirror that moved a frame at a time to create water reflections. So all the stuff that you would do in a live action film, the goal was to do as much of it. And even the crudeness of the puppets and the fur moving and things, we just decided to we didn't decide, we also by necessity just had to kind of let it go, but felt that it was part of again the sort of the handmade quality of it.
But when you have done things that are so use such sophisticated computer technologies, it's not a temptation. You can be entirely pure about this and say stop motion doesn't require that.
It's still the same thing. You move the animator. It goes back to the beginning of cinema. It's like move a figure one frame at a time, and that doesn't change. I mean, there's using a digital camera. There's certain little things that help the animator a bit, but in terms of registration and things and removal of a rig and things. But for the most part, the process hasn't changed, and I think that's for the people that do it. That's the joy of it. It's because, like I said, like on Corpse Party, a lot of people thought it was almost too sophisticated in the sense of the puppets were so good, but it still doesn't quite move like computer. And I think each medium has its strong points. Computer, you can do so many things. That's obviously the way things are going. But it's the same with drawn. I remember a few years ago, Disney said they weren't going to make any more drawn animation, which I thought was a real shame, because that has a real this can be very beautiful, So I hope that even though computers are, the way that that these other forms of animation will survive.
It doesn't feel like sort of a rearguard action. I mean, you think that there will be a future for stop motion?
Well, I hope so. I mean, when they said they weren't going to do any more drawn animated films, that didn't last long, luckily. So, I think things will go in waves, but I think there'll always be people that want to do stop motion and hopefully, have the opportunity.
And Tim Burton, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.